Good morning, everybody. Wednesday morning, continuing with our devotions this morning. We are in 1 Peter chapter 3. I'm going to read 1 through 7. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adornment be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Well, since none of you are married, we're going to skip this passage. So let me close in prayer. Well, I wish I could do that. This is obviously difficult to understand. In a Me Too 2020 academic culture, these verses are challenging to read and difficult to apply. As Christians, we believe that Scripture is authored by God who is eternal. Therefore, Scripture is eternal. What that means is that the Bible is not bound by time, by culture, or by politics. There are passages that are challenging to the 21st century person in the West that another people group or another culture will have no issue with, and vice versa. There are passages that are considered to be conservative on the political spectrum. There are also ones that squarely fall into the liberal column. We need to remember that there is much in Scripture that doesn't make sense to our modern ears. The perfect example of this is the Christian's call to love your enemies. This teaching is so ingrained in us, if you've been a Christian for very long or understood Christianity at all, people know of this call to love your enemy, that we don't even think about how radical and nonsensical this statement is. Love your enemy? That makes no sense. I want to crush my enemy. If you think of it in an athletic context, I want to bury them. I want to win. I want to humiliate them, as it were. You think of a more modern context of war, you want to defeat your enemy. You want them destroyed. You want them gone. So the call to love your enemy makes no sense. But yet here it is in Scripture. So in spite of the absurdity of the call to love your enemy, we don't get to dismiss it. We don't get to only listen to the parts of Scripture that make sense to our current cultural moments and our current understandings. So when we encounter passages like the one we're seeing here in 1 Peter, we need to resist the temptation to read them through our modern lens. So with that being said, let's take a little bit deeper look at what we're seeing here in 1 Peter 3. There's a lot here. And if you have more questions and want to dig more deeply into this, please feel free to talk with me, to talk with Dory, Latanya, Chad. Any of us would love to get a little bit deeper. But for the sake of this devotion here, look a little more broadly. Chapter 3 starts off with the word likewise, or the NASB translation is in the same way. So Peter is referring back to chapter 2, where he's calling all of us, he's calling his readers to a life of submission. Submit to authorities, submit to the government, submit to your boss, submit to one another. That's what we're seeing in chapter 2, and now we're seeing it even more in chapter 3. And as you go into 1 Peter, you're going to see it as it relates to submission within the church as well. The Christian life is one of submission. It's a life of obedience. Very critical to our understanding of this passage, but to our understanding the whole of Scripture, that the Christian life is one of submission. That's not just 1 Peter talking. The call to submission pervades the Bible. In our sinful state, we don't want to submit. We want to be in charge. I want to do what I want to do. Rebellion and selfishness have become part of our nature after Adam and Eve's failure to submit to God's command of do not eat of that tree. More broadly, what we're seeing here in 1 Peter, and what I would like to encourage you with this morning, are three things. One, we see that both men and women are called to a life of submission. Two, God cares about our heart. He cares about what's going on the inside and not our outward adornment. Doesn't care what we look like on the outside. This is so highlighted in the Gospels when Christ is incredibly harsh with the Pharisees, who outwardly look moral, look holy, look wise, keep the rules. But yet inwardly, he calls them whitewashed tombs, beautiful caskets with dead bones on the inside. That's the picture we have of the Pharisees. And that's what 1 Peter is talking about here too, in terms of the outward adornment. God cares about our hearts, not what is on the outside. And three, men and women have different roles, but they're equally heirs. Submission is hard. The understatement of the century. Submission is hard. It's often counterintuitive to us, particularly as modern people. But we have a God who understands this. See, Jesus himself submitted to a human body. This is God coming down to earth and becoming human. And all the limitations that a human body has, he subjected himself to. He submitted himself to. Jesus submitted himself to earthly authority. He had parents. There was a political structure. He was put in prison. He was executed. He didn't have to obey those things. He was God, but yet he submitted himself to his earthly authorities. And he submitted himself to the will of his Father. He obeyed, and that obedience cost him his life. If Jesus can submit and obey, then we should be able to follow that call as well. And know that he knows how difficult submission is. He's been there. He understands. He cares. And he submitted because he loved us that much. Friends, that's good news. That's the gospel. That God came down, submitted himself, subjected himself to a life on earth because he loved us that much. That's good and wonderful news. I hope the rest of your week goes well. I hope that the start of classes has been a success. And know that we miss you here. We are praying for you and are grateful for this opportunity to continue to connect and to use technology to stay invested and connected with one another. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.